Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I hope you've been well. In today's video I show you how to animate this little UX UI animation in Blender. So if you're interested in learning something new, start at Blender, follow along with me, and let's jump on into the video. Okay, so to start, as per, let's go ahead and delete our starting cube because we're not really going to make much use, and let's do Shift A and add in the plane. I'm going to scale this to 5, so S5. Tab into edit mode, press 2 to select edges. I'm going to select both these back edges and just extrude these out a bit. Control B to bevel, scroll your mouse wheel up a bunch of times. I'm going to about there will do me. Right click shade smooth, and now let's make a start on the initial platform and the phone that we see in the scene there. So to make the platform, I'm just going to add in a circle, so Shift A, circle, scale this down a little bit. Then I'm going to tab into edit mode. Then press F to fill, and then easy to extrude this up just a little bit. And then I think what I'm going to do is, I'm going to hold Shift to select this bottom face, press 3 to select faces, and then that's looking pretty good. And then just Control B to bevel this ever so slightly, and I'm going to scroll my mouse wheel down just to add one bevel. Cool, and then let's go ahead and add in a subdivision surface modifier on top. I'm going to bring that to 3, right click shade smooth, and there we have a nice smooth little platform. So I'm going to scale this up slightly to make it a little bit chunkier. I don't want to spend too much time on the phone side of things because I do want to make this primarily about the animation. So let's do Shift A, add in another plane. I'm going to go with the top view. Initially let's scale this down as a whole, then do S and X to thin this out. Then what we're going to need to do is to tab back into object mode and do Control A, apply a rotation and scale. Then in edit mode, we're going to press 1 to select vertexes, make sure they're all selected, and then we're going to use Control Shift B, and this is going to let us bevel those corners. I'm going to scroll my mouse wheel up just to put some extra vertexes in there, and I just quite simply want something, sort of iPhone shaped, to give us a nice little bit to work with. It's easy to bring this up so I can see it a little bit better. Tab back to edit mode, 3 to select this face, and then easy to extrude this up. And then I'm going to press 2 to select edges, hold Alt, click this edge here, it's going to select the entire loop, and then hold Shift and Alt and click this lower one, and that's going to select this lower edge too. And then we can use Control B to bevel. You can scroll your mouse wheel up to control how many loop cuts you want to add in there. I think around there looks pretty good. Then we'll do the same old right click shade smooth. Okay, it's looking good. And I think I just want to go into a right view mode. And then you can see our point of origin is still where the plane was. So into object, set origin, origin to center of mass. And then let's do Shift S, cursor to selected. I'm just going to add 2 little buttons on the side just to give this phone a little bit more detail. But everything is very minimal in this design. So Shift A, add a cube. So I'm going to scale this down into my right view. Let's scale this along the y-axis and scale this in a little bit here. S and Z to bring this down. And then let's go ahead and press G and X to bring this out. Back into my right view. Let's do Control A to add a rotation and scale before we do some beveling. And then let's tab into edit mode, press 2 to select edges. I'm going to hold Shift and select these 4 outer edges. Back into my right view mode, Control B, just bevel those out slightly. And then I'm going to do GY to bring this up, Shift D, Y to duplicate another one over here, tab into edit mode, press Alt Z to go into X-ray mode, 1 to select vertexes, and I'm going to select all of these, do GY to bring this down. And then we have 2 side buttons. Might want to bring these in slightly too, using G and X here. Don't want to protrude in quite as much. And then with these both selected, hold Shift, click on the phone, Control J, and they're all nicely now one object. If you do have any shading issues, just make sure to come into your object data properties here and turn on our auto smoothing. But this phone's looking pretty good. I like it. I'm just going to scale it down to RX 90 degrees. It's easy to bring this up. And then we have the nice phone to be the base of our design here. And now I want to go ahead and run this cable that you sort of saw in the design. So we're going to dive into using curves here. If this, this is the first time I'm really showing curves on this channel, but if this is new to you, don't worry. It's going to be nice and easy and should be easy to follow along. So in order to add curves, let's do Shift A, and I'm going to go into my curves option here and add in the path. Path is nice and basic. Initially it's just a nice straight line, but I'm going to do RZ 90 degrees to rotate it this way. And then let's go ahead and tab into edit mode. And what are we working with here? So let's go into top view, and all a path is, it's a bunch of vertexes connected by some edges, and what it's doing is calculating a nice smooth curve in between where you move these edges, these vertexes. So all I'm going to do is, from here, I want to create a bit of a sort of a wavy line to simulate some sort of, maybe a charger cable, and you can press E to extrude these out to keep on moving them around, and maybe to around here, something like that. I think that looks pretty cool. And now to add some geometry to these sort of things, all we need to do is come into our data properties on our object here and into geometry. What a coincidence, eh? And you can either extrude this out, but that's going to be quite flat. What I tend to do is to go straight into my bevel here, and then if we bring up the depth of the bevel, you can see it's giving us a nice cylindrical shape. I'm also going to just GZ to move this up. You can hold Shift to make this very fine adjustments. So the cable is nicely nestled on the plane here, and we've got this cool cable effect. I think what I'm going to do here is just scale up my platform a little bit, just so it's containing the end of that cable, but that's looking cool. All right, so we've almost got the general scene set up. Now I just want to add in some of those spheres you saw floating around. So let's just line up my camera initially. So I think I'm gonna go for something that looks maybe like something like this. So from here, we've already got a camera in the scene using the default camera. So I'm gonna go to View, Align View, and align the active camera to the view. There we are. And now we can make some fine adjustments by tapping into the N menu here. So press N, go to View, lock camera to view, and then just adjust these final bits until you get something that you're generally happy with. I think that looks cool. Okay, I'm gonna go with that. I'm gonna stick with it. I'll be playing with this all day. All right, then press N to close that menu, and we've got the nice basis of our design here. What I'm also going to do is do Shift right click here, and I'm going to add in a UV sphere, scale this down, and just move this over here somewhere. Add in a subdivision surface modifier on our sphere here, right click shade smooth, and I'm going to duplicate one over here, scale this down, Shift D to duplicate again, scale this down to maybe around here. And I also want some just outside of the camera view, so Shift D to duplicate, scale this one up a little bit, just so it's sort of just outside the scene but still viewable. Then Shift D to duplicate this one again, and I'm going to move it here, and then G, Shift Z to lock the Z axis to bring this one over here. And we've just got this nice balance to the image now, which we can really play around with. And if you was going to use this for perhaps a website backdrop, I always like to leave these general areas clear for perhaps a navigation menu or some call to actions over here. But of course you can use these designs in any application or design project of your choice. So let's go ahead now and add in the general UI that I'm going to be working with. So into front view, let's do Shift right click. Oh, I'll tell you what, I'm just going to do Shift S because it's selected on our phone here. Then Shift A, add in a plane. Now this is going to be the basis to the general UI interface. So I'm going to do RX 90 degrees, straighten this up, S to scale this down, and I'm going to do S and Z because I want to sort of thin this out to the point where it's kind of like the 16 by 9 dimensions of a YouTube video. And then G and Y to bring this out, tab into edit mode. I'm going to extrude this out just a little bit. And then I think I'm also going to do Control A in object mode, apply rotation and scale, back into edit mode, and let's select all 4 of these edges here, these corner edges. And then just press Control B, give these a little bit of a bevel so they're nicely rounded. Okay, I think that's looking pretty cool to me. And now we can go ahead and start adding some color before we move on to doing a little bit of animation. So let's jump on into our materials preview tab and do some coloring. Okay, so here we are. Everything is bright and white initially, but I'm gonna go into my drop down here, click on my HDRI, and I like this one. I really like this two-tone effect. I just like to use this while I'm adding in some colors, and you know, because it's pretty and I think it looks nice. So in terms of the base of the design, I'm gonna click on my backdrop and I'm gonna go for a purpley blue color. Mainly blue, because I'm trying to stay away from purple, guys, because I realized you guys have told me, you know, I use purple a lot, so maybe I should try doing something a bit different. And you're right, I do. I use it all the time. I suppose it's one of my favorite colors. So okay, I'm gonna bring my roughness up to maybe 0.7. Okay, that's cool, because I don't want the scene to be too reflective. I'm gonna call this material base, and I'm gonna use the same material on my phone and on my backdrop there, because I want it to sort of all blend in to an extent, and then I'm really going to use the lighting to create that distinction. Okay, and now I want these parts of the phone here to be a different color, so tab into edit mode on the phone, just hover over the shape here, press L and L on this one, then we just press plus on the drop down, click assign, just so we've got these, you know, we've captured them, press new. I'm just going to call this white, and then perhaps lean this ever so slightly into the blue, like a really tiny bit, just so it's a bit of an off-white. And then I'm also going to put a roughness to 0.7, and there we've got some buttons on the side of the phone. Cool. And I want these orbs here to be a bit of like a shiny gold. So in order to achieve that, I'm going to click on one orb here. I'm going to create a new material, call this gold. Oh, capital gold apparently. Whoop, whoop. And then let's give this a metallic of 1, because now it's metallic. And you know, gold tends to be like a yellowy, orangey, reddy, brassy color at times. I'm no gold expert here. I think I'm going to lean into the yellowy oranges around there. And then you can adjust your roughness if you wanted something really shiny to the point where you can see your HDRI there. Bring it right down, but I'm still keeping mine very sort of stylized, as I'm sure you've noticed with most of my videos. So around 0.4 is good for me. I don't want it to look like a realistic gold, just something, you know, shiny, pretty, and you know, stylized. Cool, but I like that. I'm happy with the general look there. And then I'm just going to click on the rest of my orbs and apply this gold color till we've got a nice gold in the scene, because I think blue contrasts nice with the gold there. And then I'm going to click on my white areas here too, and just apply that white color that we created. And there we have the initial basis to our design. If I jump into my camera view, you can see how all this is lining up, and I think it's looking pretty good. So now I want to go ahead and add in, oh, I missed an element here. Let me go ahead and add this in. So I'm going to do shift, right click here. I'm going to add in a cube, and what I'm going to add in is a nice little golden YouTube play button. Because do you know what that's ambition right there, or at least maybe I should make this silver. But I'm going to press Ctrl A, quickly apply rotation and scale, tab into edit mode. Once again, press 2 to select edges and select these 4 edges. Back into front view, Ctrl B to bevel, and just put that there. Then Shift S, cursor to selected, and in order to make the play button, I'm going to do Shift A. Add in a plane, RX 90 degrees, RX 90 degrees to flip this up, scale it down till it's relevant, tab into edit mode, press 1, select vertexes. I'm going to need to come back to my solid view and press Alt Z so I can see inside here. I'm going to select these 2 vertexes, press M to merge at center, and now we've got this nice looking play button. I'm going to press GY to bring this out. Maybe around here, tab into edit mode, press 3, select this face and just extrude this out quickly, then GY to bring this back inside. Okay, then hold shift to click them both, Control J to join them up, right click shade smooth, turn on our auto smoothing, and we've got a nice YouTube play button here. Cool. I think it's a little bit wide, but you know what, too late, we're sticking with it. I'm just gonna press R twice, give this a bit of a interesting rotation. And let's go into our materials, give this also a gold color, tab into edit mode, hover over the play button in the center, press L, plus, go into our drop down, white, assign, and now we've got a nice YouTube play button too. Cool. I think around there will do. That's looking funky. That's ambition right there, ladies and gentlemen, okay? One day we may or may not see the YouTube play buttons. Maybe silver. That'd be nice. So let's go ahead now and move into our rendered preview. And everything's really dark here, of course, because we're working with, like one light. But I want to use a HDRI today because I also wanted this video to be a little bit of a EVs tips sort of thing. So in terms of working with EVs, because we are going to render in EVs today, which is going to make sure that our render, our entire video animation render is going to be a lot quicker, because if we're working in cycles, that's going to take my computer so long to render. I just don't fancy making one of those. So to get the most out of your EV renders, what I like to do is take advantage of HDRIs. So in order to add a HDRI, which is a big 4K resolution image, which is going to simulate real world lighting, I'm going to jump on over into my shading view, and you can see now we got access to some of the nodes. If you can't see these, just make sure you've got use nodes enabled here. And I'll leave a link in the description where you can download a bunch of free HDRIs from HDR Haven. Basically all you need to do once you've got one is go into a shading tab, change into our world options here in the drop down, and we're going to plug an environmental texture into our background. So I'm going to do Shift A, and I'm just going to search for environment texture, put this here, and then open, and then wherever you've saved your HDRIs, I've got a couple here that I use quite regularly. I'm going to use this for under 4K. I'll leave a link in the description too if you want this exact one. I'm going to open and then click and drag our node, plug it into the color, then back into layout, and you should see now the scene is much brighter because we've got this big HDRI in the background that's doing its thing. It's really doing well to simulate all this real world lighting, and that's looking really cool. A couple of things I tend to do is to just perhaps add in a little bit of extra light over on one side, but really because of the HDRI we don't need a lot, so I'm going to just drop this to 200 just to really make this only a slight bit of lighting, just to give us a bit more of a shadow, and soften that up by increasing the radius of the light here, like that. That's looking pretty cool. And you may or may not want to decrease the strength of your HDRI by going into your world properties. I'm going to do 0.8, something like that. And now let's just add some extra settings to our render to really make this EV render nice and crisp. So some things you can do is enable ambient occlusion. You can see right here, this adds a bit more darkness and depth to those shadows and adds a bit more realism, and I just think it's really nice. Bloom, you can't really see much in my scene here, but what it will do, it will add a bit of a glow where that natural light is hitting and bouncing off objects. So you can just enable that and then adjust your intensity, depending on how much you want that to be present in your scene. And then I'm also going to enable screen space reflections. You can or cannot, you may or may not want to enable this. This is just going to try its best to simulate those real world reflections. They're quite prominent here on our goal objects, so I don't know if I'm going to have them enabled for this. You can, and you can also adjust, but I think I'll try them for now. But if I don't like them, you can always come back in and just turn them off. And then lastly, I'm going to go to color management. And I always tend to go for a high contrast and look, because it just really makes those colors pop and makes them look really vibrant. As I'm sure I'm sounding like a parrot at this point, but yeah, that's what I like to go for. And okay, so now I think we're in a position where we're ready to start animating. So let's jump on into the animation pane and get some animating on the go. Okay, so now we've clicked into our animation window over here, and initially it's going to look, well, it may look quite confusing, but all Blender's done is give you a nice little setup, which is really useful to start some animating. You've got one view port over here, which is set up to just look directly from our camera view, and then this is just a general layout area, which we can do some modeling and moving. And then lastly down here is our dope sheet, which just lets us set up some keyframes, to adjust, the animations and where we want everything to move to. So the first thing I suppose we can do is to adjust the phone here. So I want this to rotate in and just do some pretty stuff. So to start, I want to come into my output properties, and I like to set this now to 30 frames because we're rendering in EVs. It's not actually going to take very long to and to render, maybe a couple of minutes. So 30 frames should be fine for me. It's just going to make sure this is nice and smooth and looking beautiful. In my camera view over here, I'm also going to throw that into my rendered view so I can see how that's looking. So let's go ahead and add some animation to our phone here. To start, we're just going to do a scale because I want this to be invisible and then to pop into view. So if we come down into our object data properties here, you can see in our transform, this object has a scale of 0.774. I want this to be a scale of 1:1 because I want this to be the max, scale of the phone. So let's go ahead and press Ctrl A, apply rotation and scale. Now this has all been reset and this is the default position of our phone. So at frame 0, what I want is for this to be 0. So if you click and drag over these three here and then press 0, you can see our phone now has no scale. I'm going to press I, which is going to insert a keyframe, and we're going to insert a scaling keyframe. And now you can see we've got dots down here. This is nicely set up, and you can see this is now yellow too to let us know that there was a keyframe here. Okay, so if I drag this along at around the 20th frame, I want this to be at its max scale again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag over these three again, press 1 and press enter, and then press I, scaling, and now we've got this nice little animation where this phone appears into the frame. Boop, boop, just like that. But I also want it to have a bit of a rotation. So what I'm going to do is, when we get to frame 20, I want the Z-axis of the phone to be at 360 degrees. So it's done a full 360. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go ahead and just click on this here and do 360 degrees. And then let's go ahead and press I and insert a rotation. And what I'm going to do here is use the auto keying function. This is just going to speed up our general animation process. So if I turn this on by clicking the dot, and what this is going to do is whenever it detects a change in the general properties of this object, it's going to automatically add in another keyframe at that point in time. So I'm going to move this back to the start here at 0, and then I'm going to change this to 0, and that's going to automatically, now you can see here it's turned yellow, it's going to automatically key in a keyframe for the rotation. Now if I drag this across my timeline, you can see we now have this scaling rotation animation. How cool is that, right? It's all about those sound effects. Cool. All right, so that's looking really nice. So that's the initial part of our phone set up, and of course I want this to also animate out at around the 70 frame mark. So all we need to do is, you can treat these very much like objects in Blender. So let's go ahead and just do Shift D to duplicate, and I'm going to bring this over to 170, and then copy these frames over here too, and do Shift D, bring that to 190. And now if we watch it all the way to here, you can see it'll also animate out. So now we've already got the intro and the outro animation for the phones done, and we'll end the animation at 190. So what we can also do is set the end frames here to 190. Okay, cool, and that's just like a nice loop now, which will loop forever. Cool, looking good. Now I want to animate in this section right here, but I'm also going to do one little bit of extra modeling here to give us a nice little scrolling screen effect. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go into my modifiers here, and I'm going to add in an array modifier. I'm going to change my offset to 0 for the X, and just adjust my Z-axis offset to maybe around -1.2, and then I'm going to increase the count to around 10. So they're going to come right through the floor right now. So what I want to do is, I'm going to press Shift S to move the cursor to the phone. So make sure you click on the phone there, and then I'm going to do Shift A, add in a cube, scale this down in my front view. Whoops. Can't really see that there. To side view, Alt Z so we can see inside, S and Y to shrink this down, and I just want this to generally line up with those little video modules that we made. So it doesn't need to be too big, and then S and Z to scale this down on the Z axis slightly, and we also want to do S and X to bring this in on this side. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And now make sure you're in X-ray mode, because what I'm going to want to do is to click on my outer box here, and then shift click on the inner bit. So me just press H to hide the backdrop because it's getting in the way, and then click on the cube, shift click and click on the inner section here. I'm going to come up to object, into a bool tools, and select this brush boolean intersect. And what that is going to do, it's going to let us, if I press GZ to move these, it's going to give us like a cool scrolling animation, because the only thing that's visible is the areas that are intersecting with our cube here. So now we can create these cool video effects, cool screen slidey effects. If you don't have the bool tool enabled, make sure you come up to your edit, preferences, and then just in your add-on search for bool, and just make sure you enable the bool tools, and then you will get that tool for use. Cool. So now I can press Alt H to bring our plane back. Okay, and that's looking pretty cool. Now if you look in our preview over here, you can really see we can get this cool scrolling animation. So what I want to do is, when our phone gets to frame 20, I want to animate in this plane right here. So back into our object data properties, and at this point let's make these 0. So I'm going to do 0 on all our scales, and then by the time we get to 30, I'm going to make sure we add in a keyframe here, so I scaling, and then when we get to 30, set all these back to 1, and our automatic keyframer is still enabled here, so that should be automatically set. So if I press play here, bloop, you can see this works really well. Bloop, bloop. Cool. That's looking pretty good. And now I want to do some of the general scrolling animations. So it's going to get here, and then at around 40 frames perhaps, I want to do a bit of a scrolling animation. So initially we just need to add in another keyframe, and I'm going to add in the location keyframe. So press I and just click location. And now I want this to go around 20 frames and move in the Z axis. So we just press GZ to bring this up, and maybe to around here. And now you can see this is automatically keyed in, and I want it to sit on this frame for maybe around 10 frames. So what we can do is make sure you click off any of the other frames, highlight all of these frames here, do Shift D, and I'm going to bring this out to 70, and you can see we're getting this line here which is saying these are the same keyframe. And then when we get to 90, I want it to scroll even further, so I'm going to press GZ to bring this up again to maybe around here. And now you can see if I play this, we're getting this sort of nice scrolling effect. And all I'm going to do is continue to duplicate this and do the same sort of fashion until we get to around, say, 140. Move this across, Shift D to duplicate this out. So we're going to stay and wait here for 10 frames, and then go ahead and scroll this once again. So GZ to bring this up. And we've run out of video space here. You can either increase the amount in your array modifier, or you can end it here. I'm just going to end it here for now. So if I play this back, I'm happy with that. And then here, from here, I want it to stick around to 30 frames and then scroll all the way back to the top. So I'm just going to do GZ to bring this all the way down to around here. Cool. And now this does its thing. Cool. All right, that looks great. Now what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and animate this out, and the easiest way to do that is to just duplicate these first 2 frames, do Shift D, and then let's go ahead and start to animate this out at around 60, I think. So I'm going to put this around here, because remember this is the 0 scaling and this is the scaling of 1. So I'm going to highlight these, G to move, and put these here, and this should animate out then at this sequence right here. Cool. So now that's the general phone itself animated. And now we can move on to doing some of the general other scene objects. So let's start with the orbs. I want these to sort of bounce in, so let's go ahead and just animate this in the very same fashion. I'm going to go ahead into my object properties. Make sure you, if this isn't a 1-to-1 scale, just do Control A, rotation and scale, and then at around, when do I want this to come in? don't want these to come in at the exact same time. So maybe as this reaches its max point at 30, I can animate some of the orbs. So at frame 30, I'm going to do 0 for my scales, press I, insert scale, and then have this come in within 5 frames, so relatively quickly, and then 1, so this just pops in. And I'm going to do the same again for this one, just following a sequence. So at 35, it's going to be at 0. Try to insert scale in, and then at 40, these are going to be at 1. And I'm just going to do the exact same thing for all these other gold objects in the scene, but following a sequence of 5 frames every time. So I'm going to skip ahead into that. Okay, so if I just play out our animation here, you can see everything pops in nicely. If I just enlarge this for you so you can see this. So everything animates in nicely, and these all pop in a very sequential order, and all you need to do is play around with your frames till you get that general style. Oh, and before I forget to mention, when it comes to the orbs, I've just done the exact same thing as we did with the phone. I've duplicated the intro animations and used them to animate them out when I feel they should disappear. So don't forget to add those in too. Okay, sorry for that little jump cut there. I just had to grab myself a coffee and realize this video is getting quite long, and there's only so long a man can go without his hot beverage. Hope you don't mind. So, but the next topic of discussion to really finish this up, because you could render it as is right now and I think it would look pretty good. But what I want to do is jump into the graph editor. Now this has been another big request, is how do I adjust those little intricacies of the animations to get them looking a bit smoother. So in order to achieve this, I think we can probably go back into our layout here, layout window, and let's just drag up our playback, our keyframes and dope sheet down here. Okay, so what we're going to do initially to be able to see the graphs, if we go over here and click our drop down, in the animation area, go into our graph editor. Now we can't see a whole lot right now, this is just a graph, but if we click on our phone, Alexa, stop, always interrupting my videos. So if we click on the phone, you can see now we can see the keyframes. You can see this is the start and the scale to 1, and this is the scale to 1 and 0. But if we just scroll our mouse wheel up so I can have a nice zoomed in look at these 2 keyframes over here. Also, in your drop down, you can drop down our object transform properties, and the only thing I want to see is the scaling. So just click the eyes here. Let's not confuse ourselves. And so now we're just working with the 3 scales, and you can see this is where the general scale will end. I'm just going to control the Z there because I don't really want to move this point. I just want to adjust these little curves in between. Of course, when you initially click on one of these, make sure you drag over all of these points here, because technically there are 3 scaling nodes here, but when you drag over them, you can see you get these anchor points, and when you adjust these anchor points, they will adjust the general look of your animation. So if I bring this up here, this is going to be a sudden spike in speed, and then it's going to go a bit larger than we want, but slow down to the scale that we're after. So if I just play this back, you should see this should just, it might just be a little bit, but you'll see the general difference in animation. Yeah, so you can see it's a bit quicker off the mark now. But what I want is a bit of a quirky bounce. So to keep this nice and simple, Blender has actually got a bunch of presets that we can use. So I'm just going to highlight both of these, or I'll just highlight this one here, right click, interpolation mode. Now I like this dynamic back effect here. If I click this is pretty much doing what I want, and that's quick off the mark, a little bit above what we want, and then slowly down into the final size. So cool, there we are. So it's got a little bit of a smoother effect. You may or may not see that. If you want to make these a bit more exaggerated, feel free to adjust using the anchor points to your heart's content. But I'm just going to stick around with some of the basic interpolation modes initially, just to keep this tutorial nice and straightforward. Okay, so that one bounces in, and then let's do the same with some of the other ones now. So if I click on our videos here and zoom in, I want to do the same here. So I'm going to click on the first one, right click, and I want this to be a back, and you can see it goes whoop. If we watch this one back, yeah, see now it's got this nice, almost like a spring. So boom, boom. You see that nice, I love that nice look to the animating of the videos there. It's exactly what I'm looking for. Beautiful. And I want to do a similar sort of thing with all the orbs too. So all I need to do is the exact same thing. Click on our orb, make sure you click on the first keyframe, right click, interpolation mode to dynamic effects, back. And this will do the same sort of thing. You can see it's almost like it bounces in like a spring. Boom, you know? So, but feel free to play around with these to your heart's content. I'm just going to go through now, and for every object that bounces in, I'm going to use the exact same interpolation mode, just because I like it and I think it fits the bill for most of these animations. So just one more time, click on the orb here, hover, you know, make sure you highlight the first keyframe, right click, interpolation mode, back, and that's going to add a nice bouncing sort of appearance. So I'm just going to skip into the next bit now. Okay, I think we're there. So if I just play this back for you quickly, you're not going to see a whole lot of difference, but I feel like the animations do look a little bit smoother and more quirky. You see, so they're a little bit bouncier, am I right? Now all that's left to do really is to jump into our output properties and configure this so this is going to render as an animation. So let's jump on into that. Okay, so in our output properties, in order to get this to render as a video, you need to come down here into the output drop down, open this. Initially, this is where you can set where you want the video to save to. I've just got mine in my UX animations folder. And then in terms of file format, all these ones on the left over here, as you can see, labeled are images. So over here where it says movie, I'm going to use FPEG video. You might be familiar with like MP4 and such. So I'm going to use FPEG there, and then you've got some color options, black and white, RGB. Of course I want color, so I'm going to keep mine in RGB. Now to encode, I'm going to use MPEG-4, which is MP4, probably one of the most universal and easily accessible video formats, so I'd recommend that there. Video codec, H.264 is fine. And in terms of output quality, I'd go with perceptually lossless. I wouldn't recommend lossless because I don't know if there's a bug right now, but mine renders blank, so perceptually lossless is my preferred. Encoding speed for good is fine, and I think that's looking pretty good in terms of our animation. So all that's left to do is come up to render, click render animation, and I'm going to skip ahead into this to get the finished animation. And there we have a rather successful Blender animation. But that's going to bring us to the end of today's tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed today, and leave a comment below for any future video you'd like to see. But my name has been Keelan. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll catch you in the next one.